Okay, guys, so I've been wanting to make this video for I think past 2 days or so, but haven't got an opportunity. So let me try and communicate my reading of the situation, my reading of the international situation prevailing right now and where it's headed, because that is all the more important for us. There has been a major development in West Asia. Iran and Saudis have shook hands. They have decided to re-establish the diplomatic ties once again. And that came as a shock to many, many geopolitical analysts and many political observers and many in the strategic community. Now, there have been a lot of commentaries going on, and there have been a lot of writings on this issue. But I have a different take on why this happened. So, I mean, let's begin with what's going on in Ukraine, okay, the Ukrainian conflict. There has been a meeting between the American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the Russian Foreign Minister. It was communicated from the American side, and this has been reported in the media, that the American side actually reiterated their resolve to continue siding with the Ukrainians, to assist them in every way possible, and for as long as it takes. This is the key word, for as long as it takes. Okay, this has been communicated to the Russians. Now, what did the Russian Foreign Minister say is not important right now, because, for our, my reading of the situation, this statement that as long as it takes, America would continue to assist Ukraine is a big statement, right? Because the America and the wider West is also being asked to compensate a lot of countries so that they can transition to green energy and then they can develop themselves, their economy. But that is not forthcoming. But here in Ukraine, they are willing to, withstand, this donation to the Ukrainian cause. They are willing to sustain it for as long as it takes. That is their version. Now, what do you think they are aiming for? What is it that you think that they're aiming for? I mean, if Ukrainian conflict, prolongs, or it lingers on for a substantial amount of time hereafter, like let's say for another year or another 2 years, what do you think is going to be the situation? I think they are trying to bring about a regime change in Russia, or they are trying to destabilize the Russian economic system to the extent that the whole country plunges into some kind of a law and order situation. When that happens, what would you think would happen? The NATO, which is already till Poland, will further expand to include Ukraine and also Russian territory, and of course Belarus, because I don't think Belarus would be able to sustain the pressure without Russia. So once Russia goes down under, or the regime change happens, you can expect that Belarus would also cave in. Now, when that happens, this would be an unprecedented enlargement of NATO. Never seen before. Unprecedented enlargement because these are massive territories. Russia alone is huge. So if that comes under American influence, if that comes under the influence of NATO, or if that gets included in the NATO formation, what do you think the chances are that any country in West Asia or India or China, they're going to be standing up for their own rights and for what they believe in? What do you think there are chances? So here is my analysis. The West is trying to push and bring about a regime change in Russia or to destabilize Russia. And once that happens, they will then include Ukraine and Russia in NATO territory. And then, and about NATO, one thing you need to remember is that there is only one rule to remember about NATO. You attack one country who is a NATO member, you attack all countries. Okay, that is being seen, that is seen that way, right? You attack one NATO member, that is seen as an attack on all NATO members. So the whole force of NATO will come after you, which is happening right now. So the point I'm going to make here is that once Russia goes down under, or Russia comes under the influence of America or the NATO, what do you think happens with West Asia? I mean, the Russian oil, which is now being prohibited, which is now being discouraged by the West. I mean, that Russian oil suddenly becomes democratic, and everybody will be encouraged to buy Russian oil because there will be Western companies operating in Russian territory. And then, because there is this narrative of democracies versus autocracies going on, obviously the West Asian region doesn't have a lot of democracies. So obviously their oil, the oil that they are selling, that automatically becomes undemocratic. When you only have to, begin pushing that narrative through the media. That if it is really about democracies versus autocracies, then why are we tolerating these kingdoms? Okay, so this becomes the narrative next, which is to say that if Russian oil can now be sold under a price cap mechanism, the West Asian oil, after the Russian thing is dealt with, the West Asian oil will be allowed to sell in the international market under price cap mechanism, because of the simple reason that Russia, Ukraine, the Europe would have access to all the Russian oil it needs, and the West Asian oil would be provided under price cap mechanism to the global south, so that there is not much resentment, right? But then that will be unsustainable for West Asian countries, because these are very small countries, and only two countries, in my understanding, Saudi Arabia and Iran, are big enough, right? So this is, I think, they're going to deal with West Asia. This is how they're going to deal with West Asia, because they are finding some resistance in West Asia, and I think this is how they're going to deal with West Asia once they are done with Russia. Okay. How do you think they're going to deal with China? Well, obviously, if the Russian territory comes under the influence of the West, they're going to find some military bases close to China border in Russian territory, and they're going to further encircle the Chinese, and they're going to have a elaborate monitoring mechanism as to what's going on in China. But I think there will be also in position to regulate or restrict the energy supplies to China, which is a very big thing, because you need energy to operate, right? You need energy to operate your economy or your military, right? So that, I think, would exert enough pressure on China, which is another major country. How do you think they're going to deal with India? Because India has been this non-aligned irritant for a long time for the West. How do you think they're going to deal with India? Well, they're going to say, well, there are these very many reports coming out, international reports. You're a partly free democracy, you're an electoral autocracy, and you're not doing enough for the human rights, and whatever happens to the LGBT rights, well, we're not satisfied with what you're doing, right? So you behave, or we begin to impose some sanctions. And remember this, there are political voices coming from India, from within India, that the democracy is in such a dire strait in India that the Western nations need to intervene. There are political voices. So this is some kind of connection, okay? I'm seeing that. So what you need to understand is that all of these major powers, all of these would-be powers, all of these prospective powers, they can really be diminished once the Russian and Ukrainian conflict is decided as per the wishes of the West. Okay, so this is a major threat. I think West Asia, India, and China, all three need to get their act together and force the Ukrainian conflict to halt now. We don't want a regime change in Russia. We don't want, a destabilizing of the Russian territory or within Russia, any destabilization. We don't want that, right? And guess what? I mean, there have been a lot of talks about how Russia would no longer be a reliable supplier of the military equipments to India because it's busy with its own war and it's also a junior partner to China. That is being said, right, by the Western analysts. So the point I'm trying to make here is that once Russia becomes destabilized, the whole of the military-industrial complex within Russia also comes under the influence of the Americans or the NATO. And do you think anybody who is not an ally of the US would have any access to those weapons or to those military-industrial complexes? I don't think so. I don't think so. So this is a major existential threat for all of us. I mean, the way I see it, right? And this has to be dealt with because the world trade, the world trade phenomenon going on for the past 20 years has emboldened, has brought about some kind of economic prosperity, some kind of economic heft in many countries, and they have begun to, peddle their own narratives and not towing the line that the America or the West has been towing, right? Or they want the others to tow, right? So once that happens, they have really realized that there are a whole lot of countries who are posing a challenge to them. I mean, take, for example, Iran or North Korea. I mean, how do you deal with these countries, right? So the point I'm to make here is that the enlargement of NATO into Ukrainian or the Russian territory would solve a whole lot of problems for the Americans and for the wider West, okay? And this has to be factored in. We have to really have a close watch as to, we don't want any regime change. We don't want any regime change because of external pressure, okay? Or we don't want any destabilization of the, Russian territory or in Central Asia because we hope to have big trade relations with that region. And, that would counterbalance what our trade with the West is. And mind you, there is also another thing going on. Australia is being equipped with nuclear-powered submarines. And now the narrative is that these submarines, at least 5 of them, these submarines would patrol the seas against China. But who's to say that it would not be used to patrol against India? I mean, the seas, are we in a position to deny them that access? I don't think so, right? So this is some kind of encirclement going on, and we need to wake up to what's going on. This is my reading of the situation. Insofar as the Iranians and Saudi Arabia, shaking hands together, I think they're also seeing that this threat is really coming close to them. Okay, because mind you, the Saudis have actually decided to reestablish the diplomatic ties with the Iranians after the West has actually, pushed this narrative that Iranian drones are extensively being used in Ukraine conflict. So this warming up has come after that allegation has surfaced and is being peddled in the Western media. Okay, so this is huge. Many are saying that this is something to do with Israel and what the right-wing government there is doing. I don't think so because, Saudi Arabia and, in my opinion, Oman is the country that has recently provided overflight, permissions to the Israeli civilian airlines. So if they are doing that, they're obviously trying to commercially benefit the Israelis. And so I think the Israel has nothing to do with this. Okay, this shaking of hands has nothing to do with Israel or what kind of government they have there or what Netanyahu government plans to do ahead. I mean, nothing of that sort is in the minds of the West Asian countries, most of the Arab nations. When they decide on warming up to each other or helping each other or talking trade and investment to each other. Okay, that's not happening. Israel is not a factor here. It's all about Washington and what it's trying to do. Okay, and I think India and China and West Asia need to hold some kind of emergency meeting, and they need to say it loud and clear that the Ukrainian conflict needs to stop right here, and that we are not in agreement with any kind of regime change in Russia or any kind of destabilization efforts in Russia. Okay, that has to be spelled out loud and clear. That is my opinion. Okay, thank you.